My hands were trembling as the judge raised his gavel. I thought it was over. I thought I was about to lose my son forever. But then my 7-year-old stood up. He looked the judge dead in the eye and said, "I have something to say." And what he said next, it changed everything. This is the story of how one little boy exposed a lie that nearly destroyed us, and why sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that speaks the loudest. You're watching Revenge Her Way. Let me take you back to where it all began. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the ceiling lights. The judge cleared his throat and reached for his gavel. My hands were shaking under the table. I thought this was it. The moment I'd lose everything. My son, my future, the life I fought to keep together after my husband died. But just before the gavel came down, a small voice broke the silence. "Your Honor, I have something to say." All eyes turned to the gallery. There stood my 7-year-old son, Liam, wearing his father's old Spider-Man hoodie, holding a folded piece of paper in both hands. And in that moment, everything changed. But to understand how we got here, you have to go back. 8 months back. My name is Emily Carter. I'm a 32-year-old nurse living in Austin, Texas. I became a widow 2 years ago when my husband Ryan died in a highway collision on his way home from work. It was a stormy Friday night and he never made it to dinner. Since then, it's just been me and Liam. I didn't have time to fall apart. I had to keep food on the table, lights on in the house, and a little boy's heart from breaking. But not everyone believed I was strong enough. Margaret, my mother-in-law, had always made it clear I wasn't her choice for Ryan. She's a retired psychiatrist with a reputation in the state, sharp, articulate, and terrifying when she wants to be. She never liked me, said I lacked structure, whatever that meant. After Ryan's funeral, she started visiting more often, sometimes uninvited. At first, I thought she just missed her son, but soon it became clear she had other plans. She would make little comments in front of Liam. "Mommy looks tired again," or "Why is Mommy crying so much these days?" Subtle, cutting, and always in earshot of someone. I brushed it off. I had no proof. Then came the night everything exploded. It was 2 a.m. I had just finished a double shift, came home to find Liam had a high fever, 104 degrees. I panicked. I cried. I begged the thermometer to be wrong. I paced the hallway, holding Liam, whispering prayers to a God I wasn't sure still listened. At some point, I screamed into a pillow and collapsed on the kitchen floor. What I didn't know was that Margaret had let herself into the house earlier that evening, using the emergency key. She'd hidden a voice recorder under the couch. The next week, she filed a petition for custody. In her claim, she said I was emotionally unstable, potentially dangerous. She even had evidence, a chilling audio recording of me crying, screaming, whispering nonsense to myself. Of course, it was taken out of context. But context doesn't always matter in court. What matters is perception. My world turned upside down. Liam didn't understand why Grandma kept asking him strange questions. Why we couldn't go to the park on Sundays anymore. Why I cried more often than before. I didn't tell him about the case. I didn't want him to worry. But Liam, he knew something was wrong. He always did. That kid sees right through people. What Margaret didn't know was that Liam had heard her that night on the phone. He heard her tell someone, "I've got her now. That recording will prove what I've always said. She's broken." And Liam, barely 7 years old, decided he wasn't going to let me lose. He had a plan. And I had no idea until the moment he stood up in court and said, "I have something to say." But what came next, not even I was ready for. Grief does strange things to people. Some fall apart, some go silent, others, like Margaret, turn it into control. After Ryan died, I was barely holding on. I'd lost my partner, my best friend, the father of my child. There were mornings I didn't remember getting out of bed. Nights I cried in the shower just so Liam wouldn't hear me. I wasn't okay, but I was trying. That's when Margaret stepped in. She said she just wanted to help. "Emily," she told me, "you need rest. Real rest. Let Liam stay with me for a little while. Just a few weeks. You'll feel like yourself again." At first, it sounded like compassion. And maybe part of it was. But looking back now, I see it for what it really was. A power move. I agreed. What else could I do? I was exhausted, running on fumes, and I wanted to believe she meant well. So I packed Liam's overnight bag and dropped him at her house with his favorite stuffed dinosaur, Dino Dan, tucked under his arm. I told him I'd see him Sunday. Sunday came, and she canceled. He's having so much fun, she said. You should really take another day. Monday turned into Thursday, 1 week into 2, and every time I asked for him back, she found a reason to say no. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. When I showed up at her door unannounced to take Liam home, she met me with a lawyer. She had already filed paperwork for full custody. Emily is emotionally unfit, the document read. Displays erratic behavior consistent with severe depression, possible signs of delusion and neglect. She claimed I left Liam alone for hours, that I talked to walls, that I slept through his cries. None of it was true, but she had her degree, her reputation, and her connections. I was just a grieving widow with bags under my eyes and no savings account. And she didn't stop there. She paid a high-profile family attorney out of Houston $25,000 upfront, I would later learn. Together, they built a psychological profile of me using surveillance, selective audio recordings, and statements from neighbors she had charmed with cookies and concerned grandmother tears. They even claimed I suffered from major depressive disorder, level 3, citing things like my unwashed dishes and missed PTA meetings as symptoms of decline. It didn't matter that I was working 14-hour shifts at the hospital, that I paid rent on time, that Liam always had food, clean clothes, and more love than I ever received growing up. She painted a picture, and I was the ghost in it. The worst part, I couldn't fight back the way she could. Lawyers wanted retainers I didn't have. The court process was slow, cruel, and indifferent to emotional truth. I tried to stay strong for Liam, but every time I saw him, his hugs felt tighter. He asked when he could come home. I didn't have answers. I told him soon, but I was starting to wonder if that was a lie. Behind closed doors, a war was being waged, not with fists or shouting, but with silence, money, and the manipulation of grief. And every day that passed, I feared I was losing. But what Margaret didn't know was that Liam was watching, listening, and even though he was just a child, he understood more than either of us realized. She thought she had broken me, but she hadn't counted on the one person she couldn't control. Her grandson. Liam had always been a quiet kid, observant, gentle, the kind of boy who noticed when you switched shampoo or when your laugh didn't sound quite the same. After Ryan passed, he became even more attuned to me, like he could sense every crack I tried to seal with a smile. I never told Liam about the custody battle. I didn't want to burden him. I thought I could shield him from all of it. But children aren't stupid, and grief doesn't hide well in a one-bedroom apartment. He knew something was wrong. I caught him once, staring at me as I sat on the floor, staring blankly at a sink full of dishes. He didn't say anything, just climbed into my lap and leaned his head against my shoulder. That's who Liam was, soft power in a world of noise. But the night everything shifted. I wasn't there. Liam had been staying with Margaret for a court-ordered visitation. It was supposed to be 48 hours. He packed his favorite hoodie, the faded Navy Spider-Man one his dad gave him before the accident. He called it his armor and insisted on sleeping in it even during summer. That night, as he was brushing his teeth, he overheard Margaret on the phone. "She doesn't stand a chance," she said. "By next month, Emily won't have any legal rights left. Liam's going to be mine officially." That word, mine, hit him like a slap. Liam didn't cry. He didn't panic. He listened, every word. Then he climbed into bed, pulled the covers over his head, and began to think. The next day at school, he pulled his teacher aside. Miss Ramsey was one of the kind ones. Young, kind eyes, the kind of woman who knelt when she spoke to children. "I want to write something," Liam whispered, "but I don't know if I'm allowed." Miss Ramsey asked no questions. She handed him a lined sheet of paper and a pencil. "Write what you feel," she said. Liam wrote that letter over the course of a week, in pieces, during recess, lunch, library time. Miss Ramsey helped him fold the final version and tuck it into his backpack. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't have to. For the next 3 weeks, Liam carried that letter everywhere. At home, he would sneak into the bathroom with it and read it aloud to the mirror, practicing, memorizing, polishing every word like a soldier preparing a final message. I had no idea. He never told me, never slipped up. The only clue was how he suddenly insisted on wearing his Spider-Man hoodie every day, even when it was too hot, even when it was laundry day. "It makes me feel safe," he said once. I didn't argue. I figured kids clung to strange things when they were scared. But it wasn't fear that drove Liam. It was love. He had seen me at my weakest and loved me anyway. He had heard the whispers, the accusations, the lies, and somewhere inside that 7-year-old heart, he made a decision. If they weren't going to listen to me, he would make them listen to him. No one in that courtroom knew a 7-year-old had been preparing for this moment like a soldier going to battle. But when he stood up, with his little fist shaking and that worn hoodie hanging off his shoulders, they were about to find out. The courtroom was cold, not from the air conditioning, but from the energy. Sterile, clinical. Like love and family were things to be dissected instead of felt. Margaret sat confidently at her table, flanked by not one, not two, but 3 attorneys in sharp suits. Before them lay a binder at least 4 inches thick, tabbed, color-coded, indexed with psychological evaluations, school reports, and carefully selected evidence pulled from the lowest moments of my life. I sat across from them, alone. My public defender was late. My hands were damp. The judge had already skimmed the file. Her expression told me what I needed to know. This wasn't going in my favor. Margaret's lead attorney stood and began to summarize their case. "Miss Carter," he said, "exhibits chronic insomnia, unresolved grief, and behaviors indicative of early-stage delusional disorder. Her own neighbors report erratic episodes. One witness even described hearing her scream in the middle of the night." He paused, letting that hang in the air. I wanted to scream again, this time from rage. But I just stared at my folded hands. The judge sighed. She shuffled through some papers. "Unless there's anything else, I'm prepared to make a ruling." That's when it happened. A chair scraped, slow, soft, deliberate. Everyone turned. Liam stood up in the front row of the gallery, his Spider-Man hoodie draped over his skinny shoulders like armor. He held a folded piece of paper, and for a second his hands trembled. Then he looked the judge square in the eyes. "Your Honor," he said, his voice clear but small. "May I say something?" I wrote a letter. The room froze. The judge blinked, then motioned gently. "Go ahead, young man." He walked to the center of the courtroom with the kind of quiet courage only children seem to have. He unfolded his letter, hands steady now, and began to read. "My name is Liam Carter. I'm 7 years old. I live with my mom. She makes pancakes in funny shapes and reads 3 stories every night, even when she's tired. One time, when I had a fever of 104, she stayed up all night putting cool towels on my head and counting my breaths. My throat closed. I couldn't breathe. She always packs notes in my lunchbox that say things like, 'You're brave,' or 'Daddy would be proud.' She never yells, even when I break stuff." The room stayed silent. Even the bailiff looked down. "Grandma said Mommy's crazy, but I think love isn't crazy. I think love is staying up when you're tired. I think love is remembering which stuffed animal I need when I'm sad." He paused, looking up. Then came the line that broke the room. "If being tired means you're a bad mom, then maybe all the good moms are tired." The judge's lips parted slightly. She blinked fast and looked away. Margaret shifted in her seat. "And if it helps, I want to live with my mom, not because she's perfect, but because she never makes me feel like I have to be." Silence. Total, absolute silence. The judge finally cleared her throat. "Thank you, Liam. That was very brave." He turned, walked back to his seat, and sat down beside me. I took his hand, and he gripped mine hard. And right then, I didn't care what the court decided. I had already won. But what I didn't know was, so had he. And then he read the last line, and even the judge had to wipe a tear. The silence after Liam's last line stretched longer than any gavel ever could. You could feel it, not just hear it. It sat in the room like smoke, thick and unmoving. Everyone was still, including the court reporter who'd paused her typing. Even Margaret, who had been sitting like a queen on a throne of paperwork, stared at her hands without saying a word. "If love makes a parent," Liam had said, "then my mom is the best parent in the whole world." I broke. Tears streamed down my face. Not out of sadness, but out of something deeper. Something like release. Like after months of being painted as weak, broken, and unfit, someone finally saw the truth. And it wasn't a judge. It wasn't a lawyer. It was my son. My little boy who had watched it all, lived it all, and chose to stand with me. The judge didn't speak for a moment. Then she sat back in her chair, removed her glasses, and looked at me. Not with pity, but with something else. Something like respect. She cleared her throat. "Given this unanticipated testimony," she said carefully, "I believe there is cause to reassess several aspects of the case." Margaret's lead attorney stood, ready to object, but the judge held up her hand. "I've read this file cover to cover," she continued, "and I've had doubts, but what we just heard, what we all just witnessed, is not the voice of manipulation or neglect. It's the voice of a child who feels safe, loved, and seen, and that matters here." She turned to Margaret, her expression hardening. "In light of new concerns, I'm ordering a full review of the petitioner's submitted evidence. This includes the audio recordings and statements provided by third parties." Margaret didn't argue. She didn't even look up. Over the next 2 weeks, everything unraveled. The court's forensic experts found inconsistencies in the recordings. Several witness statements were traced back to Margaret's book club friends, none of whom had ever set foot in my home. One even recanted, admitting she'd been pressured to testify. The judge called us back for a final hearing. This time, there were no lawyers in shiny suits, no color-coded exhibits, no grand speeches. Just a woman, her son, and the truth. The judge looked at me directly. "Miss Carter, the court finds you fully capable and fit to raise your child. You are awarded full legal and physical custody of Liam Carter." I didn't cry this time. I just reached for Liam's hand and squeezed. The judge then turned to Margaret. "You may apply for supervised visitation, to be scheduled twice a month, pending a psychological evaluation." Margaret nodded once, slow. She didn't protest. She just looked at Liam. Not with anger. Not even with sadness. With something closer to disbelief. Like she'd underestimated the one person she thought she could shape. After court, Liam asked if we could stop for pancakes on the way home. I laughed for the first time in months. We sat in a booth at a diner, his Spider-Man hoodie still wrapped around him, syrup on his chin, smiling like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Justice didn't just happen in that courtroom. A 7-year-old made it happen. 3 months passed. Winter crept in slowly, laying a soft hush over everything. Rooftops dusted with frost, the morning air thick with breath, and our home finally full of a quiet that didn't feel like fear anymore. Liam was back in school, back to sleeping through the night, and back to being a kid. Most nights, we read side by side in bed until he drifted off, his Spider-Man hoodie still his favorite shield from the world. Then, one cold Thursday afternoon, a letter arrived. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, hand-addressed. No return name, just an Austin zip code, and the kind of script only Margaret used. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a single page. No legal tone, no argument, no agenda. Just a few lines written in black ink. "I raised a son who died too young," it read. "You're raising a son who saved a life. I was wrong. I see that now." No signature. No apology. But somehow, those few words said enough. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. But I did something else. That Christmas, when Liam asked if Grandma could visit and bring the cookies she used to make with his dad, I said yes, under one condition. "She gets one chance," I told him, "and she never ever tries to take you away again." He nodded, solemn and wise beyond his years. When Margaret arrived, she was quieter than I'd ever seen her. No superiority in her stance, no rehearsed charm. Just a grandmother holding a tin of gingerbread men and a small red gift bag for Liam. They sat on the floor together, decorating cookies. She asked about his school. He told her about his science fair. For a moment, it felt like something close to healing. Not forgiveness, not forgetfulness, but maybe something softer, like two people trying to meet again somewhere in the middle. I watched from the kitchen and I didn't interfere because I had learned something over those months, something Liam had shown me better than any adult ever could. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room, the one everyone underestimates, is the one that carries the most truth. And sometimes love doesn't shout. It just shows up, steady and quiet, in a little boy's words, a late December letter, or a second chance shared over broken cookies. If this story touched you the way it touched me, I hope you'll consider subscribing to Revenge Her Way. We share stories of resilience, justice, and the everyday heroes who rise when no one expects them to. And if you believe in the power of a child's courage, in the strength of mothers who fight quietly, be sure to watch our next story, because some battles are silent, but they matter just the same. Until then, hold your loved ones close. And remember, the truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be spoken.